The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing how quiet the house felt afterward. Like even the air had stopped believing in me. After the divorce, everyone told me I was lucky. Lucky to have escaped. Lucky to start over. Lucky to still be young enough to rebuild. But nobody talks about the silence that follows survival. Nobody tells you that after the shouting stops, you'll miss the noise. Because at least when someone was yelling, you still knew you existed. Now it's just me. And the echoes. I moved to a small town on the coast where the air smells like salt, and the nights fall early. The cottage was older than I expected. Its walls creaked, and every floorboard seemed to hold the ghost of someone else's laughter. The realtor said it had character. What it really had was memory. I work from home as a freelance editor. It sounds peaceful when you say it out loud, but when the only voice you hear all day is the one inside your head, peace starts to feel like punishment. The first few weeks, I tried to keep myself busy, fixing the kitchen cabinets, organizing the books by color, then by author, then by nothing at all. I played music sometimes, but it always sounded wrong, like it didn't belong to this version of me. Nights were the worst. That's when the walls whispered the loudest. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates for dinner, folding towels in pairs, turning to speak to someone who wasn't there. Old habits don't leave easily. They linger like perfume faint, but impossible to ignore. I avoided mirrors. I avoided my reflection in windows, because the woman looking back wasn't someone I recognized. She was quieter, softer, and something behind her eyes had gone out. It was mid-November, when the storm came, the kind of rain that hits the roof, like small fists. The wind howled against the glass. And for a moment, I thought it might take the house with it. I was working late that night, editing someone else's words about someone else's heartbreak. Maybe that's why I almost didn't hear the sound of a low engine outside. Then silence. When I looked out the window, there was a car parked by my gate. Headlights off. Rain bouncing off the hood like static. For a moment, I thought it was him, my ex. Because that's what fear does, it teaches you to expect ghosts, even when they're made of flesh. But when I opened the door, the man standing there wasn't him. He was a stranger. Tall. Early 40s. Maybe. Rain dripping from his hair onto his coat. Calm in a way that didn't match the storm behind him. His hands were tucked into his pockets. His voice low when he spoke. "Sorry," he said. "My truck broke down just up the road. Tow's on its way. Mind if I wait under your porch?" He didn't move closer. Didn't make excuses. Just waited. Like he'd already accepted whatever answer I was about to give. I should have said no. A woman alone. Middle of nowhere. Storm outside. It's the kind of story that never ends well. But his voice wasn't threatening. It was steady, like someone used to calming fires. Not starting them, so I nodded. And he stepped under the overhang. He didn't try to make conversation. Didn't look around like a man searching for opportunity. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the rain hit the steps. "When thunder rolled," he said quietly. "Storms come fast out here. Road floods by the old bridge. Good thing you're on higher ground." I just nodded. The way he said it felt less like small talk, more like reassurance, as if he'd already taken note of the house, the driveway, the exits, like he was wired to protect things, even when they didn't belong to him. For a while, we didn't say anything, only the sound of rain, the creak of the porch, the low hum of his presence. It was strange. I'd spent months avoiding people. Yet the sound of another heartbeat outside my house made me feel less like a ghost. He didn't ask for my name. Didn't offer his. We just existed together, in the same square of light, spilling from my doorway. After some time, he pulled out his phone, glanced at it, then looked toward the driveway. "They're close," he said softly. "The tow truck." He pushed off the porch post, rain dripping from the brim of his hair. When he looked at me, his eyes held the calm of someone who'd seen worse storms. "You should keep a light on out here," he said. "Storm nights attract the wrong kind of silence." Then he nodded once, turned, and walked into the fog. I stood there long after the sound of his boots had faded. The wind had quieted. The house behind me seemed to breathe again, like it had been holding its lungs the whole time. I closed the door slowly, the warmth of the room pressing against my back. The rain softened to a whisper against the windows. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like space, like something waiting to be filled again. I didn't know who he was, didn't even know if I'd see him again. But as I sat on the edge of my bed, watching the fog swallow the world outside, a strange thought crossed my mind. That man didn't just show up because of a broken truck. He showed up because the universe had finally decided I'd been alone long enough. I fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof, a sound that used to make me ache. But now felt almost like company, and when I woke in the morning, the first thing I noticed wasn't the quiet. It was the single porch light still glowing against the dawn, the one I'd forgotten to turn off. I left it on after that. Not for him, not for safety, but because it reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe it was small, the kind of hope that flickers like a match instead of burning like a fire, but it was there. And for the first time since my marriage ended, I didn't feel afraid of missing someone. I just wondered what it might feel like if someone decided to stay. It's strange how quickly the heart learns new rhythms. For weeks after that storm, I kept expecting him to vanish, to remain what he was, a passing kindness on a rainy night. But he didn't. He started showing up again. Quietly. Casually. The first time, it was under the excuse of bringing back a basket I'd left at the small-town grocer. He said, "Thought you might need this back." As if he hadn't driven 12 miles out of his way, just to hand it to me. The second time, he dropped off a few logs for the fireplace. The third, a set of screws and a hammer to fix the step that creaked outside my front door. He never stayed long. Never asked to come in. Never made it feel like I owed him anything. He just did what needed doing. Nodded. And disappeared into the same fog he came from. It would have been easy to call it politeness. But there was something else in his silence. Something almost reverent. Like he was protecting more than just a stranger's home. And slowly, my house began to feel less empty. The walls didn't echo as much. The mornings didn't ache the same. Sometimes, I'd find small changes. The leaky faucet tightened. The porch light straightened. The fence post repaired. He never mentioned any of it. But I always knew it was him. One day, as he finished stacking firewood by the porch, I found myself asking, "Why do you keep helping me?" He looked up, sunlight cutting across his face. "Because it's something I know how to do," he said simply. Then he shrugged, almost embarrassed by his own honesty. He didn't feel the quiet after that. He respected it. And in a strange way, that felt like love. Not the kind that demands or dazzles, but the kind that stands nearby. Quietly making sure you have enough wood for winter. Over coffee one morning, I asked him what brought him to the coast. He said he'd lived here all his life, that he ran a small mechanics shop near the docks. His words were few, but they carried the weight of someone who'd learned not to speak, unless it mattered. Later, on another morning, I asked if he'd ever been married. He paused, not like a man hiding something, but like someone deciding how much truth the air could hold. "Yeah," he said. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer." He looked down at his hands. "You never stop missing someone. You just learn to live around the hole they left." He said it quietly, like a man who had made peace with grief, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not his loss, but the way he carried it like a scar. He didn't hide, but also didn't let define him. It made me realize how differently we'd survived. He'd built walls, had built routines. Both meant safety. But his left room for sunlight. 2 weeks later. We found ourselves walking by the ocean after he'd helped fix the lock on my back door. The wind was sharp, and the water restless, crashing hard against the rocks. We walked in silence for a while. And then I said it, the thing I hadn't told anyone. I used to paint. I said, before the divorce. He looked over, squinting against the wind. Why'd you stop? Because I got tired of seeing myself in color. It came out bitter. Almost like a confession. He didn't flinch. Didn't try to comfort me. He just said, maybe paint what's left. Not what's lost. It was simple. But it broke something open in me. I hadn't realized until then. How long I'd been holding my breath, living like beauty was something I no longer deserved. That night, after he dropped me off, I took out an old box from the closet. Inside were my brushes, still stiff with dried paint. I sat at the kitchen table and dipped one in water, just to see if it still remembered how the color bled slowly across the paper. And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me move. He started coming by more often after that. Sometimes just for coffee after work. Sometimes with small things, a jar of honey from a neighbor. A broken seashell, he said, looked like a heart. We talked about ordinary things. The sound of rain on the tin roof. The way old floors complain under your feet. How every small town has its ghosts. And how maybe we were just learning to live among ours. It wasn't romance. Not in the way people usually mean it. It was something slower, softer, a kind of presence that didn't need a name. And in that quiet, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. One evening, he was fixing the latch on my window. The wood had warped from years of salt air. He was focused, patient, careful. At one point, the screwdriver slipped and cut his hand, not deep. Just enough to draw a thin line of red. Hold still, I said, and went to get the first aid kit. When I wrapped the bandage around his palm, our fingers brushed a soft, accidental touch. But the warmth startled me. It was the first time in years that someone's touch hadn't carried expectation. No need. No want. Just presence. The warmth startled me. I remember thinking, I had forgotten how human touch could feel without demand. He smiled then, the kind of small, quiet smile that hides behind tired eyes. You're good at this, he said. I shook my head. No. I'm just out of practice. He didn't argue. He never did. He just looked at me in that steady way of his, the way that made me feel like all the noise in my head could finally go still. A few nights later, the phone rang. It was my ex. His voice was smooth, practiced, still carrying that edge of control I once mistook for charm. He said he wanted to talk. That he'd changed. That he was sorry. That maybe we could start again. And even after all that time, my body reacted like it used to, heart racing. Voice small. Hands trembling. I told him no. But he kept talking. Kept trying to pull me back into that familiar gravity. Then I felt a presence behind me. Adam had come by to return a wrench he borrowed earlier. He didn't say a word. He just waited until I hung up. When I finally did, my hands were still shaking. He handed me a mug of tea he must have made while I was on the phone. You don't owe the past another apology, he said. That was all. Just that. But it was enough to make my eyes sting. Because for years, that's all I'd done, apologize for surviving. The next few days were filled with rain again. That soft, endless kind that makes the world feel smaller. I found myself watching the road more often, listening for the sound of his truck. When it came, I didn't hesitate this time. He stood by the porch like before, hands in his pockets. Rain dripping off his jacket. Eyes steady on the ground, only this time. I opened the door before he could knock. "Come in," I said. He looked up. Rainwater still tracing the lines of his face. For a moment, he just stared as if making sure I meant it. Then he nodded. Quietly. And he did come in. Not like someone entering a stranger's home, but like someone returning to a place they already belonged. The house felt different that night. The wind outside softened. The lights inside seemed warmer. And even though the rain still fell, the sound wasn't lonely anymore. He sat near the fireplace, his hands resting loosely between his knees. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was full. I watched him in the flicker of the firelight. The way his shoulders relaxed. The way the quiet didn't scare him. It hit me then, this man. This calm. This patience wasn't here to fill my emptiness. He was here to make sure I never felt small inside it again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn someone's attention or apologize for my stillness. He didn't ask to stay. He didn't need to. Because when I whispered, "You can stay a while," he just nodded once, as if the decision had already been made long before that night. Long before the storm. Maybe even long before I met him. And as the fire burned low, I realized something simple, almost terrifying in its beauty, that love doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sets down its tools, and waits for you to open the door. Winter came quietly. Like forgiveness, the first snow fell one morning before sunrise, covering everything in soft white silence. Even the ocean seemed still. Like the world had decided to rest. Inside the cottage, life had found its rhythm again. The walls no longer echoed. They breathed. The shelves held new books. The tables smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon. And a half-finished painting leaned against the window, catching the pale light. Adam had become part of that rhythm, not by force, but by presence. Some days, he came by early, leaving a paper bag of warm bread at my doorstep. Other days, he stayed late, drinking coffee by the fire while I painted in the quiet. He never said much. And somehow that made it easier to speak around him. I didn't realize how much his presence had settled into my life, until the night I found out he might leave. It was late, the wind brushing snow against the glass. I'd stepped outside to shake the doormat and saw him standing near his truck. Phone pressed to his ear. Voice low, but clear in the frozen air. "Yeah," he said. "It's good work. They want me to start in February." A pause. "No. I haven't told her yet." Her. I didn't need to ask who. He ended the call, turned, and saw me standing by the doorway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The snow kept falling between us, catching the porch light like dust made of stars. Finally, I said, quietly, "If you want to go, go. Just don't disappear without saying goodbye." He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold. "I spent years learning how to fix engines," he said softly. "But I still don't know how to fix what people leave behind." I wanted to tell him that not everything broken needed fixing, that some things could just be held until they stopped hurting. But the words caught in my throat, and all I could do was nod. That night, I didn't stay long. When the door closed behind him, the house felt like it had lost its heartbeat. But it wasn't the same kind of emptiness I used to know. This one hurt differently, not because something was gone, but because something real had been here. The morning he was set to leave, the sky was heavy with snow. He came by early, bundled in his coat, shovel in hand. Without saying a word, he began clearing the path from my porch to the road. The sound of metal scraping against ice echoed through the quiet. I watched from the doorway, coffee cup warming my hands, and thought how strange it was that a man could walk into your life so softly and still change everything inside it. When he was done, he leaned the shovel against the railing, brushed the snow from his gloves, and looked up at me. His smile was small, steady, the kind that made you trust it, without question. "Keep the porch light on," he said. "Sometimes the world needs to know where home still exists." I wanted to say something back, something like stay, or "You already are home," but all I managed was a whisper of his name. He nodded once, almost like a promise, then turned and walked down the path he'd cleared himself. The sound of his boots faded long before the light of his taillights did. When they finally disappeared, I realized I wasn't crying. The silence around me didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. The days that followed were long and quiet, but the quiet had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It had edges that curved softly, like snow settling on the roof. I filled the space with small things: baking bread, painting again, rearranging the furniture. I let music play in the background, low and steady, not to fill the silence, but to keep it company. Some mornings, I still looked toward the road, expecting to see his truck, and some nights, when the wind pressed against the windows, I imagined his voice saying, "Keep the light on." And I did. Months best. The thaw came slowly, the way healing does, quiet, invisible, 1 degree at a time. By spring, the garden was alive again. The smell of wet earth crept through the open windows, and the walls that once held only echoes now carried laughter, my laughter. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the window, I finished my first real painting. It was the cottage at dusk, the window glowing softly against the snow outside. Inside the frame, a single light burned warm against the blue of winter. I called it "Someone Waited." I didn't hang it in a gallery. I hung it in the hallway, the first thing you'd see when you walked through the door. Sometimes I'd catch myself stopping to look at it, tracing the soft lines of light with my eyes. It reminded me of that night on the porch, of the man who never tried to fix me, never demanded me story, never asked for more than what I could give. He didn't save me. He didn't have to. Some people don't fix you, they just wait outside long enough for you to feel safe, opening the door again. And that's what Adam was. A man who showed up when the world was too heavy to hold, who sat quietly in the rain until the storm passed, who left not because he stopped caring, but because he'd already done what he came to do. Remind me that love doesn't always leave. It just changes form. Now, at night, when I lock the doors and switch off the lights, I leave one lamp burning in the window. Not because I'm waiting for anyone, but because I know what it means to be someone walking through the dark, looking for proof that light still exists. That's what love is. Really, not rescue. Not fireworks. Not promises made in the heat of a moment. It's the quiet understanding that someone, somewhere, will keep a light on for you, even after you've gone. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all love was ever meant to be. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you needed the reminder that real love doesn't rush, demand, or rescue. It waits. It listens. It makes you feel safe again. If this touched your heart, share it. Tell me in the comments, what does safe love mean to you? And if you'd like more stories that feel like this, subscribe. I'll be waiting right here with the porch light on.